The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everybody to the webinar Best Practices for Managing Today's Apple Devices with Citrix Endpoint Management. You have all joined the webinar in listen-only mode, but you can ask a question in the Q&A console at any time, and we'll be answering those questions at the end. We have three speakers today: Jonathan Campos, Senior Product Marketing Manager, who is focused on our mobility solutions, and he has been with Citrix for 5.5 years. We also have Daniel Bordino, a Senior Product Manager who specializes in mobility management and is responsible for Citrix Endpoint Management with iOS and macOS. He's been with Citrix for 2 years. And also, finally, we have Paulo Oliveira, who has been with Citrix for 7 years. In that time, he has become the Citrix Endpoint Management subject matter expert for Citrix Consulting. He has worked with over 120 different customers on their deployments. So without any more delay, I will hand over to our speakers.
Thanks so much, Amy. I appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining. We're really excited to have you here to talk about some of the best practices we have for managing Apple devices. And we've put a great panel here together. So please, everyone, feel free to ask as many questions as you need to. Enter them into the questions panel there. Paulo will be taking a look at them, Daniel will be taking a look at them, and myself. And we hope to get you an answer to those questions as soon as possible. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start off the deck with this first slide here. All right, and we're going to talk a little bit about Citrix Endpoint Management, and specifically how we're going to look at it is around deploying devices, device management, content distribution, workspace security, monitoring, inventory, and a little bit about our SDK or our MAM SDK. But specifically, what we're going to do is talk about it with respect to Apple devices. So we hope we have a lot of Apple fans on the line. I gotta say, I'm also an Android fan as well. Love them both. But this one's today all about Apple. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and go to the next slide. And we're gonna ask, all right, specifically and talk about Apple user enrollment, all right? And while that may sound simple, there are different forms of enrollment for Apple devices. We're also going to talk about best practices on Apple Business and School Manager, right? So we're definitely eager to find out if any of our customers or any attendees here on the line are actually using Apple Business and School Manager, and we'll get a poll out in just a minute. And then we're also going to we're going to talk about some updates to managing your Apple applications and some general updates around iOS 14. I know a lot of you with Apple devices may still be on iOS 13. If you are, definitely update to iOS 14. Citrix Endpoint Management has full support for iOS 14. So definitely no question around that, where you're not going to have any support related features or support related issues, I should say rather. So we've had day zero support from the beginning. So we're going to talk about those specific features introduced by Apple. So next slide, please. So starting off with deploying devices, we'll go into the next slide to take a look at this major question here, right? And it is, what are the different iOS enrollment types, right? So we are all used to Apple device enrollment, which we're used to today by leveraging our DPC, Device Policy Configurator Secure Hub, right? Where we enroll into Secure Hub and we manage our device. And then we also, of course, have the very popular automated device enrollment types, which we're going to get into detail in just a second, where we go into DEP and the Apple configurator. But new to this list and in tech preview is the Apple user enrollment. And this is Apple's way of their Platform MAM approach. For my Android fans that are also on this call as well, Android Enterprise is the very famous Platform MAM offering to manage Android devices. This is Apple's way of actually deploying a MAM, a Platform MAM offering, and this is Apple's user enrollment. And this is available in tech preview. Now, what's the value of this particular enrollment type? Is that you can live or coexist in personal data as well as corporate data, right? And the cool thing is that you get to have that clear line in the sand where you see where their corporate data is on the device as well as the personal data, right? Historically, when we've looked at device enrollment or even automated device enrollment in a MAM capacity, we've seen that everything is within Secure Hub, right? But this enrollment type and deployment type expands more outside of Secure Hub and more into the platform to really show you that differentiation of corporate versus personal data. And on the next slide, we'll see here is the deploy device or types and what the differences are, right? So again, I want to reiterate, right? User enrollment is designed for BYOD. It's a device that's owned by the employee, managed by the organization with a limited set of policies, with user privacy considered and top of mind, and the enrollment is initiated by that device policy configurator, i.e. in our case, Secure Hub, Workspace app, so on and so forth, right? Device enrollment is more of a corporate device type scenario where corporations manage many different aspects, of course, of the device, right? And you can have MAM enrollment here as well. We do offer Citrix MAM. And enrollment is, of course, initiated as well by the device policy configurator. But look at the difference here, right? With automated device enrollment, where zero-touch enrollment is introduced, and it's known as a supervised device, where it's formerly known as DEP. So many of you know DEP, and let me be honest with you, when we talk internally, we still say DEP as well. We're not gonna lie, but the new name for DEP is actually zero touch enrollment. This is how Apple is kind of talking about it now, right? Automated device enrollment is where they're referencing it. And it's company-owned devices is best course of action here, right? Where, of course, you have to have your serial numbers, you have to enroll with the automated device enrollment program, or and we're going to talk a little bit more about that with ASM and ABM, business manager, school manager. And administrators can, of course, prevent the enrollment profile from being removed, right? Also from the device when we use this. And it really brings the highest level of management. Let's take a look on the next slide here, where we'll break down Apple automated device enrollment. All right. And on the next slide, we'll see how, we'll ask ourselves the very famous question of how can the Apple deployment program help? This is a great question, and we're going to show you how, and specifically why and with what SEM really does with respect to this deployment program. So both SEM, Citrix Endpoint Management, and Apple School or Business Manager make it easy to scale and secure your Apple devices, right? And why do we mean that? Why do we say that, right? It's specific because a lot of the process of getting that device enrolled with Apple Business Manager and School Manager, right, comes to life. But in addition to that, right, you got to think about your media as well from a volume perspective. So let's take a look at the next slide and go into this in a little bit more detail, right? So when we look at the three major talking points or specific points of the automated deployment program, we want to look at device management, which we've spoken about the different enrollment types, user and device enrollment. Now we're talking about automated device enrollment, right? It can help with, I should say, device management, content management, and account management, okay? And when we go on the next slide, we're going to specifically look at device management, but we're going to ask first, and we're going to run a poll. We're going to ask, are you currently using the Apple deployment program? Is anyone out there using it? And so a poll should pop up on your screen there, and you'll have the option to answer whether yes, no, or not sure. And it's okay if you're not sure, but we definitely want an answer. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say yes. I can't answer. I'm kidding. Right? But we'll have this up for about 90 seconds. I know Daniel uses the Apple deployment program. I know Paulo does as well, right? Having some fun there with the deployment program. So we'll give you guys a few more seconds here, and then we'll take a look at the results. All right, just a few more seconds. All right, let's close it off and let's see what we got.
Yeah, I think most people have voted now, so I'll close this off.
You got it. All right, and we'll take a look at those results in just a minute. So going on to the next slide, we'll see, we're going to talk specifically about the best practices with using Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager, and also about Apple Configurator as well, right? So again, talking about automating your device enrollment. So on the next slide, we'll look at what's the differences. So Apple Configurator, it's a great tool. I use it all the time, right? For quick and simple, easy installations of apps, right? When I'm working with different builds of Secure Hub, different builds of Secure Mail, as well as Secure Web, and I just want to kind of install the app, uninstall the app, really has a manual operation. And it's a device by device configuration, right? It's not really scalable. It's great for my use case when I want to test and install different builds of Secure Mail and so on and so forth and configure my iOS device to a specific stance. However, it's suitable for smaller deployments. So if you've got only 5 or 6 devices that you're managing, you can absolutely use the Apple configurator to really get the job done of what the Apple deployment program does at scale, right? So with at scale, when we look at the Apple deployment program, you're going to order devices from your reseller, your carrier, your T-Mobiles, your Verizons, your AT&Ts of the world, right? Your customer ID, right, enables those Apple devices to associate with your environment or your purchase program, right? Your specific customer ID that you're going to obtain from the deployment program, whether it be school or business manager. And then of course, you have that zero touch enrollment, all right? So let's think about the pandemic for a minute, right? Let's think about the fact that you may be, right? 5G may be a major consideration for your organization. And we all know that iOS, the iPhone 12, excuse me, was a great release for a lot of individuals because of course it really made 5G become a reality, right? So with that being said, in a pandemic, it's not as easy as, someone comes into the office, picks up the new device, turns in the old device, and so on and so forth. You typically have to mail that device. Now, if it was in the office, yeah, you could pre-configure that environment for the user. You can the device for the user. You can do what you have to do to make it happen, and the user goes on with their personal business life, right? With the Apple deployment program, think about mailing that device to the user's home, right? Think about that device being opened by the user. Think about that device being turned on and simply being already pre-configured with Citrix Endpoint Management's policies. And by way of Apple Business or School Manager, you already deploy your content. You already know how many of those licenses for that given app you're using. And Daniel's going to talk a lot in detail about that. But think about all of that end to end being a seamless experience for that end user, right? And all you're doing is just mailing that device. Heck, you can even mail that device directly from the carrier, right? So with that being said, I want to move on to the next slide. And we have our second poll, which is, are you using Apple Business Manager, Apple School Manager, or both? So we're going to get that other poll up there, Amy, if we can. Perfect. And of course, it's okay to answer, I'm not using any, or not sure. That's okay as well. And we'll have this up for a good 60 seconds. All right, a few more seconds here. And Amy, I'm not sure if you're seeing those results come in.
Yes, I can see the results coming in. I think we've got nearly everyone voted.
All right, let's give them another 10 seconds here in case someone isn't sure. And then we'll go ahead and close off the poll.
Okay, I think we're nearly there. I'm going to close the poll.
You got it. All right, so moving on to the next slide. We'll take a look at enrolling in the Apple deployment program. So again, I've been saying for quite a bit of time, there is the Apple Business Manager, right? Or Apple Business Program, I should say, that is that requires registration. and it does take some time. The enrollment process can take up to 5 business days. We've seen it done sooner, but definitely, we want to make sure that we know we kind of state everything that's on Apple's documentation, and it is, of course, it can be up to 5 business days. Duns and Bradstreet information has to be from the organization, has to be used, and so on and so forth. There is a bit of a process to register your organization, right? And then for the Apple School Manager, of course, K through 12 and higher ed institutions have to be verified, right? So they go through a thorough verification process to get enrolled. And you'll go to business.apple.com or school.apple.com to, of course, register for those particular programs. And on the next slide, we'll take a look at how we link Citrix Endpoint Management with ASM, School Manager, or Business Manager. And it's a simple 3-step process, right, within your settings. So top right-hand corner, you'll see your gear. You'll then download the public key from Apple. Once you're verified, all your paperwork is in order and everything is identified. Then you'll create a server token file and then add that token file to the Apple Deployment Program account. And it's that simple. And the interaction between, let's say, Business Manager with Citrix Endpoint Management makes it easy. So you have a lot of content that you're purchasing, right? You're purchasing books, you're purchasing apps, right? All of that will then appear, and you can make these specific policy changes to those devices, along with deploy those given apps by way of that Business Manager purchase, right? You'll see all of those apps appear. And Dan, you'll go into details on the best practices of deploying those apps in just a second. But the integration is a piece of cake. So let's move on to the next slide here. All right, and we're going to talk about the Apple User Enrollment, right? So we spoke about that at the beginning of the slide, at the beginning of the presentation when we spoke about the 3 different enrollment types, right? This is our new, right, version of, or sorry, not our new, but more so our implementation of the Apple User Enrollment. And on our next slide here, I believe we have our differences here and specific details, right? So with that, when we mentioned at the top of the presentation, right, it's specific for BYOD. Think about BYOD for a minute, right? That is not the corporate device. This is an end user's device. That's cool, right? And that's okay. But we want user privacy to be top of mind. We want to make sure that, of course, we can somehow integrate our content with Apple Business and School Manager as well, fully supported. You'll see the 2 icons there of the little briefcase there and the hat next to it, right? The 2 Apple IDs are actually generated here, and the managed Apple IDs are, of course, created by way of the Apple Business Manager and the School Manager. But the one key component here when we think about user privacy in a BYOD enrollment and a MAM implementation is, of course, that data separation, where we're separating the encrypted volume, right? Or sorry, we're creating an encrypted volume that's separated from the personal data, right? So we're literally almost partitioning the file system on the mobile device, encrypting both of those partitions, and then keeping the corporate data safe and keeping the personal data safe, right? iOS, or excuse me, UEM admins rather, will be the ones to only see what's in the corporate side of the file system, not on the personal side, right? So it's something to keep in mind there. And then, of course, the management capabilities, of course, are limited to certain management functions that, of course, Apple makes available by way of the APIs that are available for our UEM, Citrix Endpoint Management, to tie into, right? So on the next slide, we'll see what the user enrollment flow looks like. And I'm just gonna, Daniel, if you can just play out that video completely from end to end there, you'll see that we're enrolling with Secure Hub in this particular case. We'll hit next and the enrollment process will begin. We're signing in with Azure AD, and we're gonna talk about why Azure AD in just a second. We found that, of course, having Azure AD as your IDP will provide you with the easiest and most scalable way to really manage all of your identities. Then the process, you're gonna get some content, right? Kind of telling the user what's going on. And I know the video is a little bit quick, but here's where the user enrollment process kicks in. right? You're installing the profile, you're signing in to Citrix Endpoint Management, and then of course, you're now incorporating with your organization, and you can see that happening here, right? We're of course incorporated with Azure AD here, and the enrollment was successful. And it's as simple as that, right? So now the user can sign in into Secure Hub, and it's as simple as that. You can add apps from within Secure Hub, and that's it, right? So it's a simple enrollment process, kind of the same way, but again, the data is segmented specifically on the file system. So let's move on to the next slide. All right, account management, right? So you guys saw Azure AD there, right? Let's move on to the next slide here, and we're going to specifically mention, okay, are you using Azure AD as our third poll? So I'm using Azure AD. Are you? Let's fill out that poll and let's see what we got.
So I think we've got nearly everyone now. That's quite quick.
All right, I think this was an easy one for sure. All right. So now that we've got those results recorded, all right, let's move on to the next slide. And let's take a look at why we specifically mentioned this. So we look at a lot of these deployment processes, right? These automated deployment processes, and we see that with Azure AD, right, and of course, as us being a primary partner for Microsoft, we definitely recommend Azure AD as your #1 identity provider, right? And we've noticed that the scalability of leveraging Azure AD and federating Azure AD with your managed Apple ID is the best, or provides the best user experience, right? This specific with of course identity management of Apple and your end user, right? So we've seen that it provides the best user experience, and it's the most easiest and scalable way of really just, again, getting that user to enroll with the identity that they're likely used to, right? And they're likely working with. And we'll move on to the next slide to take a look at this in detail a little bit more, right? Where Daniel's going to really go into talking about what's new in MDM, and he'll touch a little bit about Azure AD, but specifically, we also are going to see where Daniel will talk a little bit about some of the iOS 14 enhancements. And Daniel, I'm really excited to learn about these because I know that Apple's invested quite a bit in MDM, quite a bit in MAM and end user experience functionality, and it's just simple. It's just simple, really, which is what Apple's really keen on doing. So so Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Okay, so good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. All right, so I'm going to talk about what is new on MDM for device deployment, right? The first part that we introduced now. So Apple constantly add new features every time that they come out with an iOS or iPadOS update, right? And they add new features to their MDM framework. So Citrix Endpoint Management needs always to implement those new features. So we're going to talk about a little bit of those features that were released this year, right? For enrollment, and this is for device enrollment, everything that it has to do with user enrollment or device enrollment. Now, organizations are able to use the customized enrollment profile to add their company name on the enrollment profile, right? So now the end user, the employee, will see the company name there together with Citrix, right? So that gives a little bit of peace of mind that to the employee that this enrollment is coming from the organization and not somebody else that I don't know, right? So that is something that is possible. It is totally optional. You can do it if you want to, but we recommend it because it's a cool, nice feature, a nice way to give peace of mind to the employee. Another feature, and this one is related to iOS 14. Every year, when there is a new iPadOS or iOS release, Apple add new screens to the out-of-the-box experience, right? For example, set Wi-Fi, set language, login into Apple ID. And this year, they added two more. One is the restore completed screen and update completed, right? That is in the case of there is a new software update, the employee has to go and do the update, and of course, once it's completed, a new screen will pop up. But as part of the zero-touch enrollment that Jonathan was talking about, right? Apple also gives the option to remove and skip those screens, right? So we're talking about, like, in total, over the years, Apple introduced, I think there are like around 10 to 12 screens, right? And if we're talking about zero-touch enrollment, right? What are you talking about if I have to go or get my employee to configure 10 different things, right? So what Apple did is basically allows the option to, or the decision comes down to the administrator to say which screen I want to show the employee. There are a few screens that they will not be able to skip, like, for example, Wi-Fi, right? Of course, because you need Wi-Fi, so the employee will have to select a Wi-Fi. But there are, out of the 10 or 12 screens, I think there are 2 or 3 that are mandatory, right? And that is part of the zero-touch deployment, like Jonathan was talking about. The idea is that you, administrator, or the manager decides that employee X needs a new device, you place the order, it is shipped, especially for now, COVID, right? It is shipped to the employee's house. The employee break the wrap of the device, start going out of the box experience, and they will basically configure the minimal required by the administration, right? So this employee can be up and running with an iPad or iPhone in a matter of minutes. And that is part of the zero-touch enrollment because it's simple. Of course, in some cases or most cases, the employee will have to enter a password, but Apple also has some options that even that is not needed, depending on how you're gonna use the device, right? So this is very important, and we always have to catch up every year when there is a new OS coming from Apple and add those options to skip the screens. Okay, now let's jump to device management. So we talked about deploy devices. Now, what can we do with respect to device management? So of course, one way to manage the device is to push policies, right? Here are the examples that all the policies that Apple MDM framework provides, right? We do support them all, right? And of course, the administrators can pick and choose. And in case you are new to Citrix Endpoint Management, here is the policies dashboard, right? But also, Apple, just like I mentioned before, every year they come out with new either policies or properties for the existing policies. Mostly it's new properties, right, that we do have to implement. And if you haven't tried, the last year we have implemented many properties on those policies listed there, right? So those are changes that we did the last year, right? For example, they added a lot of features on Exchange, a lot of features on network usage. So we have to even changed the name for the existing policy that before we call it app network usage. Now we have to rename it. VPN restrictions. Restrictions management is big, and every year Apple comes up with new restrictions, right? And one example for the iOS 14, it is Wi-Fi, and this is a big one. What Apple did for iOS 14, they decided to protect the user, right? The end user. So what they did is they randomized the MAC address, right? So for example, every time that, let's say, an employee goes to the office, they will register to the Wi-Fi network, and a new MAC address is going to be issued for that device. The employee leaves the office, comes back tomorrow, a new, totally different, totally random MAC address is going to be issued to that device, right? So that is great because nobody will be able to track the employee down, or even if the employee goes to Starbucks every day, a new MAC address is going to be issued, right? So the idea is user privacy. But there are many organizations that do use that MAC address for something, like, for example, whitelisting devices, for whitelisting websites, right? So for those organizations that do use the MAC address, they won't be able to use it anymore because it's changing. So what Apple did, they added a property, so now the administrator can disable or enable or disable that private Wi-Fi address. Right? And that is very important, right? Because if you need it, if you're using it for something, we recommend to disable it, right? By default, or sorry, to enable that, use the static MAC address, right? The default is off, right? So if you're going to be using for some reason, we recommend you to go ahead into the policy and go ahead and change the settings according to your needs. And this one was a big one, right? We got a lot of customers that were asking for it, and that's why we had to release it right away. Okay, now next topic, content distribution, right? This is also a big one, right? And very important for Citrix, for any endpoint management. So with respect to content distribution, Apple has multiple mechanisms to deliver context, right? For example, public apps, right? Everything that is on the store. Also some B2B or in-house apps, and books, not just different type of apps, but also books, right? The administrator has the ability to deploy books to their employees. And on top of that, Apple uses different methodologies to distribute those applications using Apple Business Manager and also Apple School Manager, right? We at Citrix Endpoint Management do support every single distribution method that Apple provides. Public apps, everything that is coming from the store, we do support that. That is simple for deploying apps that are free, so you don't have to pay for an app, like for example, let's say Slack or Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint. The Apple has also a volume purchase program that requires ABM or ASM, what Jonathan introduced earlier. This is the best practice, and this also works for public apps, right? But this is the perfect case when you need to purchase licenses, right? Apple call it a bulk purchase, right? You can go buy licenses, you know, with volume. Let's say you can go ahead and get a discount according to if the discount is offered by the app vendor, then you can apply a discount, etc. And that's how you do it. You do it via volume purchase. But also you can do free apps, right? You can basically buy licenses for free apps. The cost is nothing, but you can do it via volume purchase. And for that, you require ABM and ASM. And this is what Apple and we also recommend. Of course, many companies have in-house or third-party apps that are private. We do support that. We do support custom apps that is also an ABM program. It is sort of like the private store for third-party and in-house apps. We recommend this methodology as a best practice for all the in-house and third-party apps, and again, it requires ABM program. We, Citrix Endpoint Management, do have apps that we call it MDX-enabled apps. MDX-enabled apps is an extension of regular apps, if you're not aware of them. It's an extension of regular apps that allow the administrators using the endpoint management, the Citrix Endpoint Management, to control and to have better management at the app level. So far, MDM is at device level. So with MDX-enabled app, we can apply policies at the app level for security, for data leakage, etc. Right? And that is one of the applications. When you have an application that is MDX-enabled, you can use any distribution method that I mentioned before: volume purchase, enterprise app, custom apps, or public apps. And now we are launching MAM SDK as part of the app management, and the methodologies that I just listed before also works for MAM SDK enabled apps. Okay, with respect to the app deployment, what are the best practices? All right. So, of course, we are going to be using or recommending the use of ABM, ASM to deploy books or apps, right? And that is a portion of content management, right? The content management portion of ABM or ASM. You have to link them, just like you did before for deploying devices that Jonathan showed earlier. You have to link the SEM account and the ABM ASM account as a volume purchase, right? And there are a few configurations, right? Like, for example, app auto update. We highly recommend you use that one, and I will go back into that for a second. So once you link the accounts, now you can go ahead, go to ABM and ASM and purchase licenses, right? So you go ahead there, even if the app is free, you have to purchase a license, right? So you go to the ABM or ASM portal, purchase a license. The moment that you purchase a license on Apple portal, they will show up on our app deployment dashboard, right? So from the Citrix Endpoint Management app dashboard, you will be able to configure the app and deploy it to the end user, right? That's basically the process, the steps to deploy apps. And like I said before, the best practice is using the Apple deployment program or volume purchase program. Okay, we're gonna go to another poll. The question here is, are you currently distributing enterprise in-house apps? This also applies not only just in-house, but let's say a third party that is not public. So I will say, if you have any app that is private, right, that is not gonna go to the App Store, do you distribute those apps today? And we're gonna go for 60 seconds probably.
I would say so.
How are we doing with
So nearly everyone has voted. We've got a few more.
All right, cool.
Yes, I think nearly Everyone has voted now, so I will stop the poll. I think you've got an even split there of answers.
Oh, all right, cool. So the reason I ask if you deploy third-party or in-house apps, Apple has this feature that is called custom apps, right? And custom apps is highly recommended by Apple and by us to deploy this type of apps that are not going to the App Store publicly, right? Because many times you have apps that you don't want to just put it out there, right? So the custom apps is the way to go. In many cases, we have apps, for example, that are public, but the app developer makes a version for an enterprise. Like, for example, either branding, for example, they brand it or they do some tweaks for the app, right? And they don't want to publish it because otherwise it's going to be sitting next to an app that is already on the App Store. So that's why they use different mechanisms. And custom apps is the recommended way for Apple to go. Why? Number one is the organization private store. Either if you have one app or multiple apps to deploy, custom apps will become your organization private store. You have to upload the app to App Store, mark it as private, and then, of course, you're going to go through Apple approval, right? That usually takes a few days. The approval is not as strong for private apps as it is for public apps, right? Because the community is going to be much smaller. The custom apps, they deploy using volume purchase, just like the steps that I showed before. You have to connect the accounts, and then you have to sort of like purchase the licenses and then distribute it via endpoint management, just like you do any regular volume purchase. And the apps are hosted by App Store. They are not hosted by our enterprise manager. Okay, like I've been mentioning before, Apple and us, we always have new features coming up, right? So either part of the MDM framework from Apple, or we make some improvements on our side. So with respect to apps, we came out with few solutions, few improvements recently. We do have two methods to deploy any type of apps, right? Either require, that those are apps that are pushed directly when the user is enrolled, they're pushed directly to the end user's device or the employee device, they are installed silently, right? And then we also have optional apps. Optional apps are those apps that requires user interaction. The user has to go to the Citrix store and request the installation of the app, right? We have examples of companies that have many apps, let's say 50 apps. They don't want to push them all to the end user because the end user is going to end up with 50 apps, 50 icons. They might not use them all. So that's why they use optional app a lot, right? Now, with respect to required apps, one important thing was like they will auto update. The app will auto update every time that there is an update for the app, either on the public app, custom app. Every time that there is an update, it will be pushed. That update will be pushed directly and automatically to the employee or the end user, right? We did not have that option for optional apps. In that case, the employee will have to go and request the update on our Citrix App Store. So now it is supported. Now that app auto update is supported, and this is a big deal. This is something that many companies requested, and that's why we went ahead and implemented. Okay, another topic, security. This is probably one of the most important aspects of and endpoint management, right? Security is key for everybody, and security is built in with Citrix Endpoint Management. But also, we do provide many actions, and policies that you can apply to the employee device. For example, in the case of security actions, administrators have the ability to lock the device or unlock it. In the case of the employee lost the password, they can unlock it. Or if the device was lost, the device can remotely be locked. We can locate the device, the administrator can locate a device, fully wipe a device, or selective wipe a device. That is very important, because if the employee lost the device, you can just, to protect the data, the administrator can go ahead and fully wipe it, right, remotely. We also have this wipe and lock at the app level, not only at the device level. There are multiple policies that we do support for security, like, for example, all the Wi-Fi authentication, prohibit access to inappropriate apps or websites, of course, VPN, passcode, etc. There are multiple policies that we do support. Another important thing I mentioned before, we have a lot of security at the app level, right? At the app level, you can set up some policies that are exclusive to that app, not to the device. For example, we can have micro VPN for all the connectivity of that app. It will go through a micro VPN. We also have data leak protection for apps, right? One typical example is copy and paste, right? Some companies don't feel confident, or they don't want the employee to be copying an email, the content of an email, to, I don't know, either another email client or to another app, right? Like a chat app. So you can enable or disable the copy and paste. That is basically part of the data leak protection. And one very important feature is the compliance, check compliance of devices, right? So we do have an option at the app level that we can basically prevent the app of launching if something happened. For example, typical case, the employee brings his own device using BYO, and then they decide to jailbreak it, right? So we do have protection for that, right? Basically, the app, you can configure, the administrator can configure the app and say, do not launch if the app is jailbroken, right? Or another example, do not launch the app if the device is not password protected, right? So you have a few options to check for compliance. And then, of course, it is up to the administrator to make a decision. Like, for example, you don't want the app to run, or just put a warning to remind the user to set up a passcode, or to not to jailbreak the device if needed, right? So those are part of security, either at the device level or at the app level. Next, monitoring. As part of any endpoint management, monitoring is key, right? You want to know what devices you have. What are the OS versions of your devices? What type of devices? How old are your devices? Like, for example, we have many customers that they say, I don't want to have any device that's using, I don't know, iOS 12, right? So you could monitor over here, and of course, make decisions based on that. And this is our dashboard, but we have many options here to generate reports. One important thing is the user behavior security analytics. This is a tool that is called Citrix Analytics that provides risk indicators. This tool works with many other apps, like, for example, files, SaaS apps, virtual apps, but also with mobile apps, from Citrix Endpoint Management. The idea for this is that all those services and apps provide information about the usage, right? And then you can create a risk rate, right, per user or per app. So for example, one of the important information that we provide from the case of endpoint management is the device unmanaged, is an app unmanaged, jailbroken, again, right? I mean, you have users going to unusual locations, right? You can create ranges or areas that you don't want the user to go. Another thing is prohibited apps. Typical example, TikTok. A lot of people were using TikTok and there were some concerns about it. So administrators can go ahead, configure that, create a risk indicator, right? And then make decisions based on the risk rate. The decision might be nothing. I just want to know, as an administrator, I might want to know how many users use TikTok. Or the extreme is the user downloaded TikTok, I just want to kick them out of the network, right? Or the user download an app or is going to an area or a country that is not approved, right? I have the liberty to do something with that device and I can remove that user from the network. Again, we always provide the risk rate and the administrator can make the decision of what to do with that risk rate. And another important thing for endpoint management, inventory, you administrators will always want to know what you have in your network, right? Here is where you see how many people you have connected, how many device platforms you have connected, what was it last time, the user connect, what type of enrollment modes you have. We talked about 3 different enrollment modes. This is where you can see, and of course, generate reports, etc. And on top of device inventory, administrators can have an app inventory. App inventory will depend on the type of enrollment. For example, Jonathan introduced earlier what is called the supervised mode or user enrollment, right? One is from user is more important, bring your own device. The user is the one that brings the device. The other extreme is a corporate device, right? So a corporate device, the administrator has much more control over it, right? So the app inventory will be every single app that is on the device. I, as an administrator, will I be able to see the app that they have? On the case of user enrollment, no. User enrollment only shows inventory of apps that are being managed, not apps that are personal. So for example, if I use user enrollment and I want to download Facebook, there is no problem. Nobody's going to see if I'm using Facebook or not, only for corporate devices, right? So that is very handy. And again, administrators can choose to see it or not. That is up to them. Okay, and our last option here that we have for endpoint management, this is not related to device management. This is more at the app level, right? We do provide it, and it's a great complement for the whole endpoint management. So basically, the MAM NCK, what it does, it provides an app container that enhances the mobile device experience. So basically, what it does, it gives me more options to control the app, not the device, right? So we're gonna go quickly here. If you want more information, I will recommend to go to this link over here. It is something that we launched recently. It is part of the MDX enabled apps, but we are changing the way we create those MDX enabled apps. And this is it. So I think now we can go to the Q&A. I think Paulo, probably you wanted to
Yeah, I think Paulo
open up if
answered.
there's any question.
Well, Paulo looks like he answered most of the questions here on the chat. So we do have some other questions here. Let me take a look that were not answered. I think this one's best for you, Daniel. Why does Apple? I'm sorry, I misread that. What does Apple consider custom applications?
So custom applications. Yes, the name is not the best. Custom applications are any applications that will not be released publicly, right? That will not be on the App Store, right? So those are basically applications that are private for the organization, right? Something that the organization has, either it is an in-house, developed in-house, or if the application is purchased or developed by a third party, but the third party or the organization doesn't want it to put on the App Store to be available for everybody. We have, like I think I mentioned it quickly before, we have many cases that I want an application and I want my own brand. Right? I want my own logo. Let's say, for example, Slack. I don't like the Slack logo. I want to have my logo in it. Some third-party developers do that. So this is the way to deploy, and that is exactly what is a custom app. It's customized for that organization.
Okay. Thank you for that one. All right. So I could take this question. Why does Apple take so long to verify my Apple School or Business Manager account? So the short answer is Apple is thorough, right? So Apple thoroughly verifies business and school identities before access is really granted to the platform. And it can take up to 5 days. We know that. And we understand that it could potentially be a slowdown for these implementations. But of course, that is just something that's just Apple's process, right? I mean, that's really it. I mean, they say it could take up to 5 days. But they definitely do their research to make sure that the identity of the organization is who they say they are. Okay, here's another question. So are custom, sorry, Daniel, this one may be best for you. Are custom applications available on Apple School Manager?
So no, initially Apple launched for Apple Business Manager. My take is that they will also move the same feature to Apple School Manager. We are seeing a lot of services, school and business. So, but today they do not support it. Hopefully, we will see it supported soon.
Got it. All right, so Miss Amy, I think we're at time.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining the webinar today. We will be sharing a recording with all the attendees, and we'll also be sharing the presentation. So look out for that email in a few days' time. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. I will be responding to the questions we didn't have time during this call. We'll send an email later.
Great. Thank you, Paolo.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.